Stop the service, she's not dead. The voice didn't echo loudly, but it cut through the cathedral like truth always does. Quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. A few heads turned at first, annoyed more than concerned, as if someone had broken an unspoken rule of grief. Then more followed. The organist faltered. A single note hung in the air, trembling, before fading into something heavier. Near the back of the aisle, a man in a dark security uniform stood still, one hand slightly raised, not in defiance, but in certainty. Ethan Cole didn't look like a man trying to cause a scene. He looked like a man trying to stop one. "Excuse me," a sharply dressed executive snapped from the front row. "Remove him. He's delusional," another whispered. "This is a private service." Three voices, quick and dismissive, trying to bury the moment before it could breathe. But Ethan didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the casket at the center of the room, surrounded by white lilies and polished marble, where Victoria Hale, billionaire, philanthropist, untouchable icon, was supposed to be at rest. The air smelled faintly of flowers and polished wood, heavy with curated sorrow. Candlelight flickered along the edges of gold-framed portraits, casting soft shadows that danced like memory. And yet, beneath all of it, something felt wrong. Ethan took a slow step forward. "She's not gone," he said again, quieter this time, as if the truth didn't need volume, only courage. A few guests chuckled under their breath, uncomfortable, eager to dismiss him. To them, he was just the help. A uniform. A background figure who was supposed to stand still, watch doors, and never speak unless spoken to. But Ethan had spent years learning the difference between silence and stillness. And this wasn't stillness. He had seen stillness before, in places far from marble floors and polished speeches, where life didn't leave gently. He knew the weight of a body that had truly let go, and what lay inside that casket didn't carry that weight. His gaze narrowed slightly, catching something no one else had bothered to notice. Not movement. Not exactly. But resistance. The faintest tension where there should have been none. "Dead bodies don't hold on," he murmured, almost to himself. Up front, a woman in black stood abruptly, her voice sharp with authority. "This is inappropriate. Get him out. Now." Two attendants hesitated, exchanging glances. Something in Ethan's tone had unsettled them, though they couldn't say why. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't desperate. He was certain, and certainty, when it stands alone, has a way of making doubt louder in everyone else. Ethan stepped closer, now halfway down the aisle. Shoes clicked softly against the stone floor, each step measured, respectful, but unwavering. "If I'm wrong," he said, his voice steady as the flickering candles, "I'll walk out myself." A pause settled over the room, thin but growing. But if I'm right, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because somewhere beneath the layers of ceremony, wealth, and carefully constructed goodbye, the truth was already beginning to breathe, and it was about to silence everyone. "Sir, step away from the aisle." The voice came firm now, no longer whispering, no longer asking. Two men in tailored black suits moved toward Ethan, their polished shoes gliding across the marble floor with the quiet authority of people used to controlling situations before they spiraled. One of them reached for his arm, not rough, but final, like closing a door that should never have been opened. "You are disrupting a private ceremony," the man said under his breath. "Do not make this worse for yourself." Ethan did not pull away. He did not resist. He simply stood there, steady, as if the moment mattered more than his place in it. "You are about to bury a living person," he replied calmly. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room, thinner this time, forced, like people clinging to normalcy, because the alternative felt too heavy to hold. "This is absurd," the executive from earlier said, louder now, turning halfway toward the guests as if performing reassurance. "The doctors confirmed her passing 12 hours ago. There is documentation. There are witnesses. This man is confused. Or desperate for attention," another voice added. "Security really needs to vet their staff better." The words landed like soft stones, not loud, but meant to push him down, to remind him where he stood in the invisible hierarchy of the room. Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment, not in shame, but in thought. Then he looked back at the casket. The stillness around it felt staged, too perfect, like a photograph that had been edited one too many times. He had seen real endings before. They did not look like this. Check her hands, Ethan said quietly. You will see it. Enough, the woman in black snapped, her voice cutting clean and sharp. She stepped forward now, heels clicking with precision, her presence commanding immediate attention. Her name was Margaret Hale, Victoria's sister, and there was no grief in her eyes, only irritation. This is not a discussion, she continued. This is a funeral. And you are a guard, not a physician, not a family member, not someone with the right to speak here. 3 statements, delivered without pause, each one stripping away his credibility piece by piece. The room leaned into her certainty, because certainty was easier than doubt. Ethan nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words without surrendering to them. You are right, he said. I am not a physician. He took a breath, measured, controlled. But I have held more lives in my hands than most doctors ever will. That shifted something. Not enough to convince, but enough to pause. A subtle hesitation passed through the nearest faces, like a crack forming beneath polished surface. Margaret's expression tightened for just a second before smoothing again. Even if that were true, she said, her tone colder now, it does not give you the authority to interrupt this service with speculation. It is not speculation, Ethan replied. It is pattern. The attendants tightened their grip slightly, preparing to guide him away. One of them leaned closer. Sir, please, let us handle this the proper way. Ethan's gaze remained forward, unwavering. There is no proper way to bury someone who is still fighting to breathe. Silence pressed in again, heavier now, no longer dismissed so easily. A man near the second row shifted in his seat. A woman lowered her program slowly, her eyes no longer avoiding the casket. The organist did not resume playing. And somewhere in that carefully controlled room, doubt took its first real breath. Margaret noticed it. Of course she did. Her eyes flicked across the guests, reading the shift like a seasoned strategist. This was no longer about one guard. This was about control. Dr. Simmons, she called, her voice firm but measured, turning toward a man standing near the front. Would you kindly clarify for everyone here the condition of my sister? A middle-aged man in a gray suit stepped forward, adjusting his glasses with practiced composure. Miss Hale was examined thoroughly, he began. There were no signs of life. No pulse. No respiration. The conclusion was clear. He paused just long enough to let certainty settle again. She is deceased. A few shoulders relaxed. A few heads nodded. Order began to reassemble itself. But Ethan did not look at the doctor. He looked at the casket. And then, almost gently, he said, then why is she still trying? It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it carried something deeper than argument. It carried conviction. And for the first time since the interruption began, no one laughed. No one spoke, but the silence had changed. It was no longer polite or ceremonial. It was searching. Ethan could feel it in the way the air shifted, in the way eyes that once dismissed him now lingered just a second longer than before. Doubt had entered the room, and doubt, once invited, does not leave quietly. Explain what you mean. Someone from the third row called out, not aggressive, not supportive, just uncertain. It was the first voice that did not try to shut him down. Ethan did not turn toward the speaker. His eyes remained fixed on the casket, as if everything that mattered was already there. When the body lets go, he said slowly, everything softens in a different way. Not just still, not just quiet. It releases. He took a small step forward. The attendants hesitated this time. They did not tighten their grip. They did not pull him back. They waited. But sometimes, Ethan continued, his voice calm, measured, almost instructional. When someone is not gone, the body holds tension. Very small, almost invisible, like it is still trying to stay. Dr. Simmons frowned slightly, adjusting his stance. That is not medically supported in this context, he said, though his tone lacked the same confidence as before. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging the response without arguing against it. Maybe not in your context, he said, but I have seen it in mine. A flicker of memory passed behind his eyes, not dramatic, not loud, just present. The kind that does not need explanation to carry weight. In places where you do not get a second opinion, he added quietly. The room absorbed that. Margaret crossed her arms, her patience thinning. This is not a battlefield, she said. And my sister is not your experiment. No, Ethan replied gently. She is. Your sister. That landed differently. Not as a challenge. As a reminder. Margaret's jaw tightened, but she did not respond immediately. For the first time, her eyes shifted toward the casket, just briefly, just enough for doubt to touch her as well. Ethan saw it. Everyone did. He took another slow step forward, now close enough to see the details others had overlooked in their grief or in their certainty. The lighting was soft, designed to comfort, to smooth edges and soften reality. But even soft light reveals truth to those who know where to look. "Look at her fingers," Ethan said, not raising his voice. "They are not fully relaxed." A few guests leaned slightly, subtle, almost involuntary. The distance was too far to confirm, but the suggestion alone changed the way they saw the still form inside the casket. "That is not possible," Dr. Simmons said, more quickly now. "Post-mortem rigidity would not present that way at this stage." "Exactly," Ethan replied. "Not confrontational, not triumphant, just certain." Another pause. Longer this time. The kind that stretches until it becomes uncomfortable. The organist shifted on the bench, but did not play. A candle flickered harder, as if reacting to something unseen. Somewhere near the aisle, a man loosened his tie, the room suddenly feeling warmer than before. Ethan lowered his voice even further, almost a whisper meant for the truth itself rather than the people around him. "She is not resting," he said. "She is waiting." That sentence did not echo, but it stayed. It settled into the corners of the room, into the polished wood, into the careful arrangement of flowers that now felt less like tribute and more like a mistake waiting to be uncovered. Margaret took a step forward, her composure cracking just slightly. "Doctor," she said, quieter now. "Check again." It was not an order. It was something else. Something closer to uncertainty. Dr. Simmons hesitated. Just for a moment. Then he glanced at the casket, then back at Margaret, then at the room full of watching eyes that were no longer convinced of anything. And in that fragile space between certainty and truth, everything began to shift. Dr. Simmons did not move right away. He stood there, caught between two worlds that rarely overlapped, the world of certainty he had built his reputation on and the quiet, persistent doubt now pressing against it. "This is unnecessary," he said at last, but the words came slower than before, like they had to pass through something heavier. Margaret's eyes did not leave him. "Check again," she repeated, softer now, but with a weight that did not ask for permission. Around them, the room had shifted completely. No one was whispering anymore. No one was dismissing. They were watching, waiting. Ethan stepped back slightly, not to retreat, but to give space. This was no longer about proving himself. This was about allowing the truth to surface on its own. He had seen this moment before, not in cathedrals or beneath chandeliers, but in places where seconds mattered and hesitation could change everything. He knew that look on the doctor's face. The moment when training meets uncertainty, and instinct begins to speak louder than protocol. "Doctor," Ethan said quietly, not interrupting, but guiding. "Just look. That is all I am asking." Dr. Simmons inhaled slowly, then turned toward the casket. Each step he took seemed louder than it should have been, the soft soles of his shoes echoing faintly against the marble floor. He reached the edge and paused. The polished wood gleamed under the candlelight, reflecting a version of reality that felt too still, too composed. He hesitated, then leaned in slightly, his professional composure returning in small, practiced motions. Two fingers moved forward, hovering just above Victoria Hale's wrist. The room held its breath. Ethan did not move. He did not speak. His eyes softened, not with confidence, but with something deeper, something like hope tempered by experience. "There is nothing," the doctor said after a moment, pulling his hand back. A few shoulders dropped. A few guests exhaled quietly, relief beginning to creep back into the room like a tide returning to shore. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, as if reclaiming control. But Ethan's gaze did not change. "Not there," he said gently. "You are checking where it is easiest to check, not where it is hardest to find." The doctor frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Ethan replied, his voice calm and steady, "sometimes the body hides what it is fighting to keep." A flicker of irritation crossed the doctor's face, but it was weaker now, less certain. "This is not standard practice," he said. "No," Ethan agreed. "It is not." He stepped closer again, not crossing the boundary, but close enough to see what others still missed. "But neither is this situation." 3 seconds passed. Then 4. Then something shifted again. Dr. Simmons glanced once more at Margaret, who gave the slightest nod, barely noticeable, but enough. Slowly, carefully, he leaned in again, this time closer to Victoria's face. The room leaned with him. He adjusted his glasses, focusing, observing not just with training, but with attention. The kind of attention that sees beyond expectation. Ethan watched his expression change, not dramatically, but subtly. A tightening around the eyes. A pause that lasted a fraction too long. The doctor did not speak immediately. And in that silence, something undeniable began to form. "What is it?" Margaret asked, her voice no longer sharp, but edged with something fragile. The doctor straightened slightly, then leaned in once more, closer than before. This time, he did not use his hands. He simply watched. And listened. The room was so quiet now that even the faintest sound would have been heard. The candles flickered. The air shifted. And then, almost imperceptible, there was something else. Not a movement. Not a sound that could be named. But enough. Just enough. Dr. Simmons stepped back slowly, his face no longer composed in the same way. The certainty was gone. In its place was something far more honest. He looked at Margaret, then at Ethan. And for the first time since the service began, he did not speak with authority. He spoke with truth. "I may have been mistaken." The words did not echo. They did not need to. Because in that moment, the entire room understood something had just crossed the line between assumption and reality. And nothing was going to be the same again. The words did not land loudly, but they broke something open in the room that could not be closed again. "You may have been mistaken," Margaret repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it too clearly would make it real in a way she was not ready to face. Dr. Simmons swallowed, his composure no longer intact in the way it had been minutes before. "There is a possibility," he corrected, though even that sounded fragile now. "I need to reassess." 3 guests stood up at once, their chairs scraping softly against the marble floor. "What does that mean?" one asked. "Are you saying she is alive?" another pressed. "This cannot be happening," a third murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The room, once controlled and choreographed, had begun to unravel, not into chaos, but into something far more unsettling, uncertainty. Ethan remained where he was, quiet, steady, his presence no longer dismissed, but not yet fully accepted either. He did not look at the guests. He did not look at Margaret. He watched the casket, as if everything else was just noise around the only truth that mattered. "We need to open it," he said softly. The sentence did not demand. It did not push. But it carried weight. Margaret's head turned sharply toward him. For a moment, something flashed across her face, not anger, not grief, but resistance. The kind that comes when control begins to slip. "No," she said immediately. "That is not necessary." "It is," Ethan replied, just as calm. "If there is even a chance." "There is not," she cut in quickly. But the certainty was gone now, replaced with something thinner, more brittle. Dr. Simmons already confirmed. She stopped herself mid-sentence, the contradiction hanging in the air between what had been said before and what had just been admitted. Silence pressed in again, heavier this time, no longer neutral, but expectant. All eyes shifted between Margaret, the doctor, and the casket, as if the answer might reveal itself if they simply stared long enough. Dr. Simmons exhaled slowly, then looked at Margaret, not as a professional to a client, but as a man facing a decision he could not delegate. "Margaret," he said carefully, "if there is any doubt, even a fraction, we have an obligation to be certain." The word obligation lingered. It did not accuse. It reminded. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly at her sides. Her gaze flickered once more toward the casket, then away, as if looking too long might confirm something she was not ready to accept. "And if you are wrong?" she asked quietly. "Then we proceed as planned," the doctor answered. "But if I am not," he did not finish. He did not need to. The weight of what remained unspoken filled the space between them. A man in the front row leaned forward. "Open it," he said, not loudly, but with a firmness that carried across the room. Another voice followed. "We need to know." Then another. "Just check." 3 voices, different tones, same direction. The room was no longer resisting. It was turning. Margaret closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if calculating something deeper than emotion. When she opened them again, the sharpness had softened into something harder to read. Not surrender. Not yet. But not refusal either. She nodded once, barely perceptible. Dr. Simmons turned toward the attendants. Carefully, he said. The two men hesitated, then moved forward, their earlier confidence replaced with caution. One reached for the edge of the casket lid, his hand pausing just above it. The other glanced at Margaret, then at the doctor, waiting for confirmation that this line, once crossed, could not be uncrossed. Ethan did not step closer. He did not speak again. His role was no longer to convince. It was to witness. The candlelight flickered again, casting shifting shadows across the polished wood, as if even the room itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. The attendant took a breath, then placed his hand firmly on the lid. And in that suspended second, before anything moved, before anything was revealed, the entire room held the same fragile thought, that everything they believed might already be wrong. The attendant's hand pressed down gently, then slowly lifted. The faint sound of the seal releasing echoed louder than it should have, a soft shift of polished wood that carried through the cathedral like a quiet crack in certainty. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to pause, as if waiting to see what truth would reveal when nothing else could hide it anymore. The lid rose inch by inch, careful, controlled, respectful, but beneath that control was something else now, something uncertain. The flowers beside the casket trembled slightly as the motion disturbed the stillness. Candlelight flickered across Victoria Hale's face, illuminating it not as a symbol of loss, but as something unfinished. Ethan's eyes did not waver. He had already crossed the moment of doubt. For him, this was no longer a question. It was confirmation waiting to surface. Easy, Dr. Simmons said quietly, stepping closer, his voice no longer authoritative, but attentive. Slowly, 3 seconds passed as the lid reached its full open position. Then silence settled again, deeper than before. Victoria lay exactly as she had been presented, composed, still, untouched by the room's rising tension. To most, nothing had changed. To most, she looked exactly as someone should in that moment. But not to Ethan. And now, not only to him. Dr. Simmons leaned in carefully, closer than before, his eyes scanning not with assumption, but with intent. His training returned, but this time guided by doubt instead of certainty. He watched her chest. Still, he watched her face. Calm. He hesitated, then lowered himself slightly, bringing his ear closer, not touching, just listening. The room leaned with him again. Margaret stood frozen, her composure held together by something thinner than before. Her hands were no longer steady. She did not speak. She could not. Somewhere in the back, a woman covered her mouth softly, not out of fear, but anticipation. Ethan remained just behind the line, his posture quiet, grounded. He did not need to step forward. The truth was already doing that for him. Doctor, someone whispered. No answer came. Dr. Simmons stayed still for another moment. Then another, his expression shifting in ways too subtle for most, but undeniable to those watching closely. His breath slowed. His eyes narrowed. Then, carefully, he lifted his hand, hovering just above Victoria's collarbone, not pressing, not forcing, just observing the smallest possible sign. And then it happened. Not a movement that could be seen clearly. Not a sound that could be named with certainty. But enough. Just enough. The kind of moment that does not announce itself, but changes everything once it is noticed. Dr. Simmons froze. Completely. His hand did not move. His posture locked. His eyes widened just slightly, as if something he could not explain had just become impossible to ignore. Ethan exhaled softly, not in relief, but in recognition. He had seen that moment before. The moment when life refuses to be dismissed. What is it? Margaret's voice came again, but now it carried something fragile, something almost pleading. Dr. Simmons did not respond immediately. He leaned in once more, closer this time, listening with everything he had. The room held its breath with him. And then, slowly, he straightened. His face was no longer the face of a man explaining a situation. It was the face of a man realizing he had almost missed one. He looked at Margaret, then at the room, then, finally, at Ethan. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried further than anything said before. Call emergency services, he said. A pause. Now. The word now did not echo, but it moved people. Chairs shifted. Someone reached for a phone. Another stepped back in shock. The room, once controlled by certainty, now moved under urgency. But even in that movement, something else remained. A silence beneath it all. A realization that had already settled before anyone acted. Victoria Hale was not gone. And the only person who had truly seen it before anyone else had been the man no one thought was worth listening to. The word now moved through the room faster than fear, faster than pride, faster than anything that had tried to keep control just moments before. A man near the aisle fumbled with his phone, fingers unsteady. "Calling 911, he said, his voice low but urgent. Another guest stepped back, knocking lightly against a chair, eyes locked on the open casket, as if seeing it for the first time. The cathedral, once arranged for farewell, had become something else entirely, a place suspended between ending and return. Dr. Simmons leaned in again, this time with purpose, no hesitation left in his movements. "Victoria," he said, not loudly, but clearly, as if speaking to someone who might be just beyond reach. "If you can hear me, stay with us." His hand hovered close, careful, attentive, watching for any response, no matter how small. Margaret stood frozen at the front, her composure no longer a shield, but something she was trying to rebuild in real time. This is not possible," she murmured, though the words no longer carried conviction. They sounded like something repeated out of habit, not belief. Ethan remained still, just behind the line where action and observation met. He did not rush forward. He did not claim anything. His role had never been to take control. It had always been to see what others overlooked. And now, the room was finally seeing it too. "Clear some space," Dr. Simmons instructed, his voice sharper now, grounded in responsibility. "She needs air." Two attendants immediately moved, stepping aside, adjusting the arrangement around the casket, their earlier certainty replaced with careful urgency. The flowers were shifted. The space opened. Light reached further across Victoria's face, no longer softened by distance, but direct, revealing details that had been hidden by assumption. Ethan's gaze followed that light. He watched the smallest things. The faintest tension around her jaw, the subtle resistance in her stillness. Not absence. Not yet. "Come on," the doctor said quietly, more to her than to anyone else. "Stay with us." 3 seconds passed. Then 4. The room held itself in place, every breath measured, every movement restrained by the weight of what might happen next. And then, something changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but undeniably. A slight shift. So small it could have been dismissed a minute ago. But not now. Not anymore. Dr. Simmons inhaled sharply, his focus narrowing. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. No one answered, because they had. Margaret took a step forward without realizing it, her eyes wide, fixed, searching for confirmation that her world had not just turned on itself. Ethan exhaled softly, not in surprise, but in quiet acknowledgement. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Not for recognition, not for validation, but for truth to surface on its own terms. "Victoria," the doctor said again, a little stronger this time. "If you can hear me, try to respond." The silence stretched, but it was no longer empty. It was full of possibility, full of something returning. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, her fingers moved. Just a fraction. Just enough. A collective breath was pulled from the room all at once, not loud, but unified. Chairs creaked. Someone stepped back. Another covered their mouth, eyes filling with something that had no name yet. Margaret's hand lifted toward her chest, her posture breaking for the first time, not from loss, but from something she had not prepared for, hope. Dr. Simmons turned slightly, his voice firm again, grounded now in action. "Emergency services are on the way," the man with the phone said quickly. "They are 3 minutes out." 3 minutes. In a room that had almost accepted an ending, 3 minutes suddenly felt like everything. Ethan finally took one step closer, not into the center, not into the spotlight, but just enough to stand where he could see clearly. His eyes met Victoria's hand, still faintly tense, still holding on. And in that quiet, fragile space between life and assumption, one truth stood undeniable: she had never stopped fighting. And for the first time since the service began, no one questioned the man who had seen it first. The 3 minutes did not pass like normal time. They stretched, expanded, filled with something heavier than seconds, something closer to consequence. Every eye in the room remained fixed on the open casket, no longer as a place of farewell, but as the center of a truth no one had prepared to face. Dr. Simmons stayed close, his attention unwavering, his voice low but steady. "Victoria, stay with us," he repeated, not as an instruction, but as an anchor. Her fingers, still faintly curled, twitched again, slightly more this time, not enough to be dramatic, but enough to erase all doubt. A quiet gasp moved through the room, not loud, not chaotic, but deeply human. Margaret took another step forward, her heels no longer echoing with authority, but with hesitation. She reached the edge of the casket, her hand hovering just above it, unsure whether to touch, unsure whether she was allowed to believe what she was seeing. "Victoria," she whispered, her voice breaking in a way that had nothing to do with performance. It was real now. All of it. Ethan stood a few feet behind, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, almost invisible again, as if he had already stepped out of the moment the instant it no longer needed him. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Margaret. His attention remained where it had always been, on the quiet fight unfolding in front of him. The distant sound of sirens began to rise outside, faint at first, then clearer, cutting through the silence with purpose. Someone near the entrance turned, relief and urgency crossing their face at the same time. "They are almost here," a voice said, softer now, as if even urgency had learned to respect the moment. Dr. Simmons adjusted his stance, his training now fully engaged. "We need to keep her airway clear," he said to the attendants, who nodded quickly, moving with careful coordination. The flowers were moved further aside. Space widened. Light reached her face more directly now, no longer filtered, no longer softened. And in that light, the illusion of stillness was gone. Victoria's breathing was faint, uneven, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Not imagined. Not assumed. Real. Margaret's hand finally lowered, resting gently against the edge of the casket, not touching her sister, but close enough to feel the presence she had nearly lost. Her eyes did not leave Victoria's face. The control she had held so tightly had dissolved into something quieter, something more honest. "How did we miss this?" she asked, not accusing, not directing the question at anyone in particular, but asking the room itself. No one answered, because there was only one answer, and it was standing quietly behind them. Ethan. But he did not step forward. He did not claim it. That was never his way. The sirens grew louder, now just outside the cathedral doors. The sound of them arriving carried something else with it. Not just help, but confirmation that what had just happened would not be dismissed, would not be undone. The doors opened, and emergency responders moved in with calm efficiency, their presence grounded, focused, practiced. "What do we have?" one of them asked, stepping forward. Dr. Simmons did not hesitate this time. "Female, mid-40s, previously declared deceased," he said, his voice steady, clear. "But she is responsive. Faint breathing. Minimal movement. She needs immediate evaluation." The responder nodded, stepping closer, his attention shifting fully to Victoria. The room parted instinctively, making space, not just physically, but emotionally, for what was happening. Ethan stepped back slightly, giving the professionals the room they needed. His role, once again, complete without announcement. Margaret looked up, her eyes searching the room until they found him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need, because in that look, something passed between them that words would only complicate. Recognition, gratitude, and something quieter than both, respect. The responders carefully began their work, their movements precise, focused, grounded in reality. The room watched, but no longer with doubt, only with quiet understanding, because everything had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And as Victoria Hale continued to fight her way back into a world that had almost let her go, one truth settled over everyone present. The difference between loss and life had not been power, or status, or certainty. It had been one man's quiet refusal to ignore what did not feel right. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. The sirens faded into the distance as the ambulance doors closed, carrying Victoria Hale away from a farewell that had almost become permanent. The cathedral remained, but it no longer felt like a place of mourning. It felt like a place that had witnessed something it could not explain, something that would linger long after the flowers were removed and the chairs were reset. Guests stood in quiet clusters, not speaking loudly, not speculating the way people often do, but reflecting. The kind of silence that follows truth, not confusion. Dr. Simmons remained near the front, his posture different now, less rigid, more human. He glanced once more at the open casket, then slowly closed his eyes, as if replaying the moment where certainty had almost cost everything. Margaret Hale stood still for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the empty space where her sister had been. The authority she carried earlier had softened into something deeper, something quieter. When she finally turned, her eyes found Ethan again. He was already stepping back, moving toward the edge of the room, returning to the place he had always occupied, unseen, unnoticed, unnecessary, until he was not. "Ethan," Margaret called, her voice steady, but no longer distant. He paused, then turned slightly, not stepping forward, not assuming anything. She walked toward him, each step measured, not out of hesitation, but out of respect. When she reached him, she stopped, just a few feet away. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, simply, "You saved her." Ethan shook his head gently. "No," he replied. She held on. A pause. Then he added, "I just listened." The words settled between them, not dramatic, not grand, but true. Margaret nodded slowly, as if understanding something she had never considered before. "Everyone else had proof," she said quietly. "Doctors, reports, confirmation." And still, she did not finish. She did not need to, because the ending had already spoken for itself. Ethan gave a small nod, then stepped back again, not waiting for recognition, not staying for gratitude. That was not who he was. He adjusted his jacket, simple, worn, ordinary, and walked toward the exit the same way he had entered, quietly. No applause followed him. No one stopped him. And yet, every eye in the room tracked his movement until he disappeared through the doors. Because now they saw him. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, honest. Ethan paused for just a second at the top of the stone steps, looking out at the world that had almost continued without noticing what nearly happened inside. Then he exhaled, steady and calm, and kept walking. Somewhere, a life had been given another chance. Not by power, not by status, but by attention, by dignity, by the quiet strength of a man who refused to ignore what did not feel right. And maybe that is the question that stays with us long after the story ends. In a world that moves fast, that trusts appearances, that values certainty over curiosity, how many truths do we miss simply because we do not stop to look closer? If you believe in second chances, in quiet dignity, and in the kind of courage that does not need recognition to matter, take a moment to subscribe and stay with us for more stories that remind us what truly makes a difference. Because sometimes, the strongest voice in the room is not the loudest one. It is the one that speaks when no one else is willing to listen.